Her boss forced her to her knees in the freezing snow, unaware that the man watching from the shadows was the most dangerous crime lord in Seoul. The blizzard was merciless that night. The neon signs of the city hummed against the gray sky, but the streets were empty and unforgiving. Most of the city was already safe indoors, escaping the biting wind. But not Nyla Washington. She stood in the hallway of the corporate tower, trembling, humiliated, and fighting to keep her composure. She had worked double shifts for weeks, twice as hard as anyone else just to prove she belonged. Her modest winter coat was threadbare and offered no protection against the chill. Director Kim didn't care about her hard work. He sneered at her, pointing a manicured finger toward the frozen pavement outside. "Get on your knees and beg for your position," he spat. "Or don't bother coming back." She wanted to throw her badge in his face. She wanted to walk away with her dignity, but she was thousands of miles from home with no safety net. She needed to survive. So, she stepped out into the storm. The cold cut through her practical clothes like a knife. Snow clung to her hair immediately. Her legs felt heavy. Her hands shook uncontrollably at her sides. She walked to the center of the courtyard and did the unthinkable. She lowered herself onto the ice, her knees hitting the pavement with a sickening thud, her head bowed in defeat. Her boss watched from the warm lobby for a moment, laughed, and turned away. What he didn't know, what he was too arrogant to see, was that a sleek black sedan had been idling at the curb the entire time. And the man stepping out of it, adjusting his tailored dark overcoat with a terrifyingly calm expression, was Choi Sung-hyuk, the Dragon of Seoul. And the woman shivering on the ground wasn't just an employee to him. She was the woman he was ready to burn the city down to save. Before we continue, if you love powerful protectors, intense slow-burn romance, and justice served cold, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The lobby of the Hanul Corp Tower was suffocatingly warm, a stark contrast to the deathly pale winter raging outside the glass doors. Nyla Washington stood near the reception desk, her fingers gripping the strap of her worn tote bag until her knuckles turned ashen. She hadn't slept in 24 hours. The hum of the heater sounded like static in her ears, but it was Director Kim's voice that cut through the haze like a serrated blade. "Incompetence," he sneered, tossing a stack of files onto the pristine floor. The papers, her work, the result of 3 consecutive double shifts, scattered like debris. "I asked for perfection, Nyla. This is garbage." "I followed the formatting exactly as you asked, Director," Nyla said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her legs. She knew the rules. As a foreigner, she had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. She had been perfect. It didn't matter. Kim stepped closer, invading her personal space with the arrogance of a man who knew no consequences. "You talk back? You think because you are American, you are special?" He laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "You are nothing here. You are disposable." He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising, and shoved her toward the revolving doors. The security guards looked away, pretending not to see. In this building, Director Kim was God, and Nyla was the sinner he was purging. "You want to keep this job?" Kim hissed, pushing her until her back hit the cold glass. "You want to stay in my city?" "Yes," she whispered, hating the word as it left her lips. She needed the visa. She needed the money. She had no safety net, no family to catch her if she fell. Kim pointed a manicured finger at the courtyard beyond the glass. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, burying the gray pavement. "Then go out there, kneel, and apologize for wasting my time." Nyla stared at him. "It's 10 degrees below zero. Then you better beg quickly," he smirked. "Go, or you're fired." Nyla looked at the warm, golden light of the lobby, then at the white void outside. A week's worth of groceries cost less than the coat she needed but couldn't afford. Her rent was due in 2 days. Pride was a luxury she lost the moment she landed in a country that didn't want her. She pushed through the doors. The wind hit her instantly, a physical blow that stole the breath from her lungs. The cold wasn't just temperature. It was violence. It bit through her thin trousers and stung her cheeks. Nyla walked to the center of the icy plaza. Her legs, weakened by hunger and overwork, finally gave out. She sank to her knees, the wet snow soaking through her jeans instantly, and bowed her head, waiting for the end. Nyla couldn't feel her toes anymore. The biting wind had stolen the sensation minutes ago, leaving only a dull, throbbing ache in her bones. She kept her head bowed, staring at the gray slush staining her jeans, while the muffled sound of Director Kim's laughter filtered through the revolving doors. Then, the air shifted. It wasn't a change in the weather. It was a change in pressure, heavy and suffocating, like the moment before a lightning strike. The laughter inside the lobby died abruptly. A heavy car door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gavel in the empty courtyard. Nyla didn't look up. She didn't have the strength. She heard footsteps crunching against the ice, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. They weren't the hurried steps of a commuter escaping the storm. They were the prowling strides of a beast claiming its territory. A pair of polished black Oxfords stopped inches from her knees. Director Kim scrambled out of the revolving doors, his arrogance evaporating into panic. "And Mr. Choi? Sir? I didn't know you were. This is just a discipline matter. She is." The newcomer didn't even blink. He didn't look at the frantic man stammering in the doorway. To him, Director Kim was less than the slush beneath his boots. His gaze was fixed entirely on Nyla. "Stand up." The command was low, barely a whisper, yet it carried more authority than any shout Nyla had ever heard. It wasn't a request. Nyla raised her head slowly. Through the haze of exhaustion, she saw him. Choi Sung-hyuk. He towered over her, a figure cut from darkness and expensive wool, his face an unreadable mask of sharp angles and cold fury. "I." Her voice cracked, failing her. Her legs refused to move. Sung-hyuk didn't wait. In one fluid motion, he shrugged off his heavy, tailored overcoat. The wind whipped at his suit, but he didn't shiver. He draped the coat over Nyla's shoulders, engulfing her in warmth, weight, and the scent of cedar and aged whiskey. He didn't ask again. He reached down, his leather-gloved hands gripping her arms with a firmness that was possessive yet startlingly gentle, and hauled her to her feet. The world tilted, but he was a solid wall against the vertigo. "Mr. Choi, please," Kim squeaked, his face draining of color as he finally realized the gravity of his mistake. "I was just..." Sung-hyuk finally acknowledged him, but only by pausing. He didn't turn around. He simply adjusted the collar of the coat around Nyla's frozen neck, shielding her from the snow. The silence that stretched between them was violent, promised ruin. Without a word, Sung-hyuk guided Nyla toward the idling black sedan, leaving Director Kim standing alone in the cold, trembling with the terrifying certainty that he was already a dead man walking. Consciousness returned not with the jarring sound of an alarm, but with a silence so profound it felt heavy. Nyla blinked, her eyes adjusting to a dim, slate-gray light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. She wasn't on the freezing pavement anymore. She was buried in layers of charcoal silk and down, a warmth so encompassing it felt like a physical weight. She sat up, the sheets sliding off her skin with a whisper. The room was vast, a cavern of polished concrete, dark wood, and glass. It was beautiful but in a cold, clinical way, like a museum exhibit where nothing was meant to be touched. Nyla swung her legs over the edge of the mattress, her feet sinking into a plush rug that felt deeper than the snow she had knelt in just hours ago. Panic, sharp and sudden, spiked in her chest. She looked down at herself. She was still wearing her worn thermal leggings and the faded, oversized sweater she had bought secondhand 3 years ago. The fabric was pilled and fraying at the cuffs, a stark, ugly blemish against the pristine luxury of the room. Her eyes darted to the chair in the corner, a piece of furniture that looked like a sculpture. Draped over it was Sung-hyuk's heavy wool overcoat, dark and imposing. Beneath it lay her own coat, thin, synthetic, and damp, pooling on the marble floor like a dirty rag. The contrast made her stomach turn. Her entire existence, her struggle, her poverty, her desperate need to survive, was laid out in that pile of cheap polyester, looking grotesque inside this fortress of wealth. She stood up, walking cautiously toward the glass wall. Seoul sprawled out beneath her, a glittering grid of lights and motion, But from this height, the noise of the city was non-existent. The people, the traffic, Director Kim, they were all microscopic. This place wasn't just a home. It was a stronghold. The elevator doors she could see down the hall were brushed steel, lacking buttons, likely coded to a biometric scanner. There were no personal photos, no clutter, no signs of life other than the terrifying precision of order. Nyla wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the climate-controlled air. She had prayed for safety, for a respite from the biting wind, but as she looked at her reflection in the glass, small, tired, and dressed in rags, she realized she hadn't just been rescued. She had been collected. And in a world this expensive, everything had a price. Nyla's fingers hovered over the sleek, buttonless panel of the elevator. Panic hummed beneath her skin like a low-voltage wire. It was Monday, 8 a.m. If she wasn't at her desk in 30 minutes, the humiliation in the snow would have been for nothing. It requires a biometric scan. A deep voice rumbled from behind her. You won't be able to call it. Nyla spun around. Sung-hyuk stood in the archway of the kitchen, a mug of black coffee in one hand. He had traded the overcoat for a charcoal turtleneck that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, but the aura of absolute control remained unchanged. I have to go, Nyla said, her voice tight. She smoothed down her fraying sweater, painfully aware of how pathetic she looked against the marble backdrop. Director Kim, if I'm late Director Kim is not expecting you. Sung-hyuk took a slow sip of his coffee, his eyes tracking her every micro-movement. You don't understand, she insisted, stepping away from the useless elevator. I need this job. My visa is tied to it. My rent is due. I can't afford a sick day. You don't have a job, Nyla. The words were spoken with the casual finality of a judge delivering a sentence. Nyla froze. What? You no longer work for Hanul Corporation. He set the mug down on a glass console table. The sharp clink echoed in the silent room. I removed you from the roster this morning. You got me fired? The air left her lungs. Do you have any idea what you've done? I have nowhere to go. I have nothing. You have this, he said, gesturing vaguely to the penthouse, as if it were the only reality that mattered. He walked toward her, closing the distance until he loomed over her. A dark, immovable force. Look at your hands. Nyla looked down. Her knuckles were cracked and raw, the skin purple from frostbite. You are malnourished. You are hypothermic. You are exhausted. Sung-hyuk listed her condition not with cruelty, but with a terrifying, clinical detachment. You are not leaving this apartment until I decide you are strong enough to survive the world outside it. I'm not your prisoner, she snapped, a spark of her old defiance flaring up. I'm not a pet you can just keep. No, he agreed softly, his gaze dropping to her trembling hands. You are a liability, and until you are fixed, you stay where I can see you. He turned his back on her, walking toward his study. Breakfast is on the counter. Eat, then rest. Do not try the door again. Nyla stood rooted to the spot, caught between gratitude for the warmth and terror of the golden cage that had just snapped shut around her. Nyla stared at the paper cup sitting on the pristine marble island. It wasn't a ceramic mug from the penthouse's expensive espresso machine. It was a cheap, wax-coated takeout cup from the convenience store 3 blocks from her old office. She picked it up, her hands still trembling slightly. The label was handwritten in Hangul. Hazelnut, 2 pumps, oat milk. It was her specific order. The small luxury she allowed herself only on Fridays when she had skipped lunch to save money. But today was Tuesday. Drink, Sung-hyuk said, walking into the room. He didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on a tablet he was scrolling through with precise, rhythmic swipes. You need the sugar. Nyla didn't bring the cup to her lips. She gripped it tighter, the warmth seeping into her cold palms. How did you know? Sung-hyuk finally looked up. His eyes were dark, devoid of the guilt or hesitation a normal person might feel when caught invading someone's privacy. 7:15 a.m., he recited, his voice low and factual. You take the 402 bus from Itaewon. You sit on the left side by the window, but you never look at the river. You look at your notes. You get off one stop early to save the transfer fare and walk the last kilometer, even when it rains. Nyla took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs. The air in the room suddenly felt thin. You've been stalking me. I have been watching you, he corrected, as if the distinction were obvious. He set the tablet down and moved around the counter, closing the distance between them. There is a difference, Nyla. Is there? She felt exposed, stripped of the anonymity she had worn like armor in this city. For how long? 3 months. Why? Her voice broke. I'm nobody. I'm a foreigner with a debt and a bad job. Why would someone like you care about which bus I take? Sung-hyuk stopped in front of her. He didn't touch her, but his presence was so intense it felt like a caress. Because in 3 months, I have watched that city try to break you every single day, he said softly. I watched men like Kim scream at you. I watched the winter bite you. I watched you carry the weight of a world that doesn't want you. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her eyes, searching them. Most people crumble, he whispered. They quit. They cry. They break. You never did. You stood up, straightened your coat, and worked harder. Nyla felt a lump form in her throat. For years, she had felt invisible, ghosting through Seoul like a shadow. To be seen, truly seen, not for her mistakes or her foreignness, but for her survival, was a shock she wasn't prepared for. I didn't think anyone noticed, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I noticed, Sung-hyuk said. I saw everything. Sung-hyuk didn't wait for Nyla to process his admission. He reached past her, retrieving a sleek, matte black medical kit from a drawer she hadn't noticed. He set it on the marble counter with a quiet thud, the sound breaking the heavy silence that had settled between them. Sit, he instructed, nodding toward the high-backed bar stool. Nyla hesitated, but the throbbing in her fingers was becoming impossible to ignore. She climbed onto the stool, her movements stiff. Sung-hyuk opened the kit, his movements precise and practiced, revealing rows of sterile gauze, ointments, and tools arranged with surgical order. He extended a hand, palm open. Give me your hand. Nyla placed her right hand in his. It looked grotesque against his. Her skin was swollen, the knuckles cracked and bleeding, the nail beds turning a bruised shade of violet from the exposure. She felt a flash of shame, an urge to pull away and hide the ugliness of her struggle. But Sung-hyuk's grip tightened just enough to stop her. He didn't look at her face. His focus was entirely on the damage. He uncapped a tube of medicinal balm, the scent of eucalyptus and antiseptic filling the small space between them. This will sting, he warned, his voice low. He applied the ointment with a touch that contradicted everything she knew about him. The man who commanded armies of criminals, who could destroy a career with a phone call, was tracing the contours of her broken skin with the delicacy of a restorer handling a crumbling manuscript. Nyla hissed as the cool gel hit a raw split in her knuckle. Sung-hyuk paused instantly. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathering near his ear. He didn't apologize. Apologies were for accidents, and this was no accident, but he slowed down. He massaged the balm into her skin in small, circular motions, his thumb brushing over her palm. The sensation was overwhelming. His hands were large, calloused, and impossibly warm. Heat seeped from his skin into hers, thawing the deep-seated chill that had settled in her bones. Nyla watched him, mesmerized. His lashes were lowered, casting long shadows on his cheekbones. He looked peaceful, almost, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a restrained violence in the way he stared at her injuries as if he wanted to wage war on the cold itself for daring to touch her. You have beautiful hands, he murmured, the words slipping out as if he hadn't meant to say them. He began wrapping her fingers in soft, white gauze. They are strong. They have worked too hard for people who do not deserve them. He finished the bandage and didn't let go. He held her wrapped hand in both of his thumb resting over her pulse point. Nyla's heart hammered against her wrist, a frantic rhythm she knew he could feel. She looked up and he was already watching her. The composure was there, the mask of the dragon, but beneath it, his eyes burned with a raw, terrifying intensity. For 10 seconds, neither of them breathed. The air between them crackled, charged with the sudden, undeniable realization that he wasn't just fixing a wound. He was claiming it. The rumor started as a whisper in the back alleys of Itaewon, traveled through the neon-lit host bars of Gangnam, and finally landed, heavy and dangerous, on a mahogany table in the VIP room of the Club Onyx. Secrets in Seoul were currency, and tonight the exchange rate was high. He took her to the penthouse, a nervous lieutenant murmured, his eyes fixed on the floor. Not a hotel, not a safe house, the residence. Jang-soo sat deep in the plush leather booth, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He was a man of sharp edges and loud appetites, the volatile opposite of Choi Sung-hyuk's icy control. For years, he had circled the dragon's territory, looking for a crack in the armor, a loose thread to pull. He had found nothing. Sung-hyuk was a machine, cold, efficient, and devoid of human weakness. Until now. A woman, Jang-soo repeated, the words tasting strange on his tongue. He leaned forward, the light from the table casting long, jagged shadows across his scarred face. Choi Sung-hyuk brings a woman home? A mistress? No, sir. The lieutenant hesitated. Witnesses say he carried her. He put his own coat on her. And she is a foreigner. A black woman. No connections. No family. Jang-soo paused. The glass stopped moving. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face, revealing teeth that looked too white in the dim light. He carried her, Jang-soo whispered, savoring the image. The man who wouldn't dirty his hands to shake the president's hand. Carried a stray off the street. The room went silent. The implications hung in the smoke-filled air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. In their world, affection wasn't just a vulnerability. It was a death sentence. To bring a civilian into the inner sanctum, to show her care, to let her stay, it was a declaration of obsession. She hasn't left the building in 48 hours, the lieutenant added. His security has been doubled. He fired her boss this morning. Personal. Jang-soo set his glass down. The sound was a definitive clack that made his men flinch. He's protecting her, Jang-soo said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr. The monster has found a pet, and he thinks he can keep her in a tower where no one can touch her. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. The chaos of the club thumped against the soundproof glass, a rhythmic heartbeat of violence and excess. Find out who she is, Jang-soo commanded. Find out where she came from. If Choi Sung-hyuk has finally grown a heart, I want to be the one who cuts it out. The silence in the penthouse was usually heavy, but comfortable, a blanket of expensive isolation that kept the chaotic world at bay. Nyla sat on the edge of the plush velvet sofa, nursing a cup of tea, watching Sung-hyuk review documents at the dining table. He looked scholarly in his reading glasses, the soft light of the chandelier softening the sharp planes of his face. Then his phone buzzed. It was a single, short vibration against the marble surface, but the sound seemed to sever the tranquility in the room. Sung-hyuk didn't look at the screen. He answered on the second vibration, bringing the device to his ear. Speak. The shift was instantaneous. The man who had carefully wrapped her frostbitten fingers in gauze vanished. The man who had ordered her favorite coffee simply ceased to exist. In his place sat a creature of absolute, terrifying cold. His posture didn't change. He didn't stiffen or raise his voice, but the temperature in the room plummeted. Nyla's Korean was functional, learned from years of navigating a society that barely tolerated her. She knew enough to order food, to ask for directions, and to understand insults. She understood this, too. He declined the offer? Sung-hyuk asked. His voice was low, a smooth baritone stripped of all humanity. It was the voice of a judge delivering a death sentence without looking up from his paperwork. He listened for a moment, his eyes fixing on a point in the distance. Nyla felt a shiver crawl up her spine that had nothing to do with the winter outside. Then he is of no use to us, Sung-hyuk said. He reached for his fountain pen, uncapping it with a slow, deliberate twist. Burn the warehouse. Ensure the insurance does not cover the loss. Nyla stopped breathing. The cup rattled against its saucer. And the hand he used to wave me away, Sung-hyuk added. as casually as if he were ordering dinner. "Break it. Make sure he never signs a check again." He hung up. He set the phone down and returned to his document, signing the bottom of the page with a fluid, elegant stroke. The scratching of the nib on paper was the only sound in the penthouse. Nyla stared at him, horror pooling in her stomach. She looked at his hands, large, capable, steady. The hands that had saved her life. The hands that were currently dismantling another man's existence from a distance. Sung-hyuk looked up, sensing her gaze. The coldness lingered in his eyes for a fraction of a second, a glimpse of the dragon behind the man, before he blinked, and the mask of the composed gentleman slid back into place. "Is the tea too cold?" he asked gently. Nyla couldn't speak. She realized then that the safety she felt wasn't because the danger was gone. It was because the danger was sitting right in front of her, and for some reason he had decided not to bite. Yet, the smell of paprika, thyme, and sautéed garlic was an act of rebellion in a kitchen designed for aesthetics rather than use. Nyla stood over the stainless steel stove, stirring a pot of stew that bubbled with a thick, reddish broth. It was a recipe from her grandmother, a piece of Louisiana brought to the sterile, high-altitude silence of Seoul. For the first time in days, the penthouse felt lived in. The air, usually scrubbed clean by expensive filtration systems, now carried the heavy, comforting weight of spices. Sung-hyuk appeared in the doorway. He had shed his suit jacket, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He paused, inhaling deeply, his expression unreadable. "It smells loud," he said, walking toward the island. Nyla stiffened, her hand tightening on the wooden spoon. "I can open a window." "I didn't mean to. I didn't say stop." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. The movement was fluid, cat-like. "I said it was loud. This apartment is usually too quiet." Nyla hesitated, then ladled a small portion into a bowl. She slid it toward him, feeling a sudden, irrational spike of anxiety. This was her culture on a plate, bold and unapologetic, served to a man who lived in a world of muted colors and disciplined silence. Sung-hyuk picked up the spoon. He tasted it without hesitation. The heat of the cayenne hit him, and his eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise breaking his composure. He took another bite, slower this time. "It has heat," he murmured, setting the spoon down. "It lingers. It's comfort food," Nyla said, leaning back against the stove. "Back home, we cook like this when the world feels cold. It reminds you that you're still alive." Sung-hyuk looked at her then, his dark eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "And here? Do you feel alive here, Nyla?" "I feel watched," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. "In this city, I stand out. I walk down the street and people stare, or they whisper. I'm a drop of ink in a glass of milk. I can never just be." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with understanding. Sung-hyuk moved closer, invading her space with that gravitational pull he seemed to control at will. "I understand," he said quietly. Nyla looked up, surprised. "How could you? You own this city. You walk into a room, and everyone bows." "They bow," Sung-hyuk corrected, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "Because they are terrified to look me in the eye. You are isolated because they see you as different. I am isolated because they see me as a monster." He reached out, his thumb brushing a stray curl of hair from her forehead. The touch was electric, grounding her. "We are both ghosts in this city, Nyla," he said. "Everyone sees us, but no one knows us." For the first time, Nyla didn't pull away. In the warmth of the kitchen, surrounded by the scent of home and the presence of a dangerous man, she realized she wasn't the only one who was lonely. She was just the only one who showed it. The study was the heart of the penthouse, a room lined with dark walnut shelves and filled with the scent of old paper and expensive tobacco. When Sung-hyuk called Nyla inside, the air felt different, charged with a cold, metallic anticipation. He stood behind his massive desk, his silhouette framed by the city lights. On the pristine surface of the wood, a single black folder lay waiting. "Sit," he said. Nyla obeyed, sinking into the leather chair opposite him. Her heart beat a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Is this about? Am I in trouble? No, Sung-hyuk said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. But someone is. He slid the folder across the desk. It stopped inches from her hand. Nyla opened it. The first page was a bank statement. The second was a series of emails. The third was a police report, drafted but not yet filed. She scanned the names, the dates, the amounts. Her breath hitched. Director Kim, she whispered. Embezzlement, Sung-hyuk clarified, walking around the desk to stand beside her. He rested a hip against the wood, looking down at the documents with bored disdain. Tax fraud, labor violations, and 3 counts of bribing safety inspectors to overlook the faulty wiring in the warehouse. Nyla looked up, her eyes wide. How did you get this? I didn't just get it, Nyla. I curated it. He reached down, his finger tracing a line on the page. I had my forensic accountants tear his life apart. Every cent he stole, every corner he cut, every illegal transaction he tried to hide in offshore accounts. It is all there. He paused, letting the weight of the paper sink in. He didn't just fire you, Sung-hyuk said, his voice dropping to a low growl. He tried to break you. He used his power to make you feel small. He leaned closer, bracing his hands on the arms of her chair, trapping her in his space. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and steel, filled her senses. I have destroyed men for less, he murmured. But this is not my kill. It is yours. Nyla looked back at the file. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a demolition. If this information went public, Director Kim wouldn't just lose his job. He would go to prison for 20 years. His reputation would be ash. The police are waiting for a whistleblower, Sung-hyuk said softly. The prosecutor is a friend of mine. He needs a signature from a former employee to validate the timeline. He pulled a heavy, expensive fountain pen from his pocket and set it on top of the damning papers. I dug the grave, Nyla, he whispered, his lips inches from her ear. All you have to do is push him in. Pull the trigger. The glass doors of Director Kim's office slid open with a soft hiss, interrupting his tirade against a weeping secretary. He spun around, his face purple with rage, ready to eviscerate whoever dared to disturb him. When he saw Nyla, the shout died in his throat. She wasn't the trembling, frozen creature he had discarded in the snow 3 days ago. She wore a tailored wool coat that cost more than his car. Her hair was swept back in an elegant twist, and her spine was steel. She didn't look like a desperate foreign worker anymore. She looked like Judgment Day. You, Kim sputtered, adjusting his tie nervously. How did you get past security? Get out before I call the police. You can call them, Nyla said. Her voice was soft, devoid of the anger that had burned in her chest for days. It was the calm of a storm that had already passed. They are on their way to arrest you, Director. Kim laughed, but the sound was brittle. You are delusional. Get out. Nyla walked to his desk. She didn't slam the black folder down. She placed it on the mahogany surface with a gentle, deliberate slide. It came to a rest directly under his hands. The offshore accounts in the Caymans, she said, reciting the facts Sung-hyuk had given her. The bribes to the safety inspectors for the warehouse fire. The tax evasion dating back to 2021. Kim's face drained of color. His hands shook as he flipped the cover open. His eyes darted across the pages. The bank routing numbers, the emails he thought he had deleted, the damning timeline of his greed. Who gave you this? He whispered, sinking into his chair. This is impossible. It doesn't matter, Nyla replied. She looked down at the man who had made her beg for her livelihood, and realized with a jolt that he was small. He was pathetic. The original files are with the prosecutor. This is just a courtesy copy. Kim looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. Nyla, please, we can work this out. I can give you a raise, promotion, anything. I don't want your money, Director, she said, stepping back. And I don't want this job. I quit. She turned to leave. In the corner of the room, half hidden by the shadows of a large potted palm, stood a figure in a dark suit. Director Kim hadn't even noticed him. Sung-hyuk leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression impassive to the untrained eye. But Nyla saw the slight tilt of his head, the darkening of his gaze as he watched Kim crumble. It wasn't just satisfaction in his eyes. It was pride. Deep, possessive pride. He caught Nyla's gaze as she approached the door. He didn't smile, but he nodded once. A silent acknowledgement that the debt was paid, the balance restored. As Nyla walked out, leaving her former life in ruins behind her, Sung-hyuk pushed off the wall and followed, the shadow trailing the light. The ride back to the penthouse was silent, but the air between them had shifted. It was no longer the tense silence of strangers, but the heavy, charged quiet of two people orbiting a shared secret. Nyla stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the city sprawl out like a circuit board of gold and obsidian. Her reflection ghosted against the glass, superimposed over the lights of Seoul. For the first time in years, she didn't see a tired, struggling foreigner. She saw a woman who had just walked through fire and survived, all because the monster in the dark had decided to walk beside her. She turned to find Sung-hyuk watching her. He had shed his jacket and tie, leaving him in a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He held a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly as he swirled it. He looked weary, the lines around his eyes deepening in the low light, but his gaze on her was as intense as a physical touch. Nyla's heart stuttered. It wasn't just gratitude she felt anymore. It was a terrifying, magnetic pull that terrified her more than the cold ever had. She was falling for the Dragon of Seoul. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper in the cavernous room. Sung-hyuk paused, his glass halfway to his lips. Why what? Why did you do it? She took a step toward him. You destroyed a man for me. You gave me a home. You healed my hands. Why? I'm nobody. Sung-hyuk, I have nothing to offer you. He set the glass down with a sharp clack. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping inches from her. The scent of sandalwood and expensive whiskey enveloped her. You think you are nobody, he murmured, his voice rough. He reached out, his knuckles grazing her cheekbone. His touch was fire. You have no idea what you look like to a man who lives in the dark. Then tell me, she breathed, leaning into his hand. Tell me what I am. Sung-hyuk's eyes dropped to her lips. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, tilting her head back. For a heartbeat, the mask slipped. The composed, ruthless syndicate leader vanished, replaced by a man starving for something he knew he couldn't have. He leaned in, his breath hitching, his forehead resting against hers. You are. He started, the words caught in his throat. Everything. My redemption. The only thing I haven't ruined. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of her skin. But behind his eyelids, he saw the blood on his hands. He saw the violence that trailed him like a shadow. He saw the target he had just painted on her back. He pulled away as if burned. You are a guest, he said, his voice turning cold and flat. He stepped back, putting a cruel distance between them. And I am a man with many enemies. Do not mistake my protection for affection, Nyla. It is safer for you if you don't. He turned his back on her and walked to the liquor cabinet, leaving her standing alone in the window's reflection, cold once again. The emerald silk cascaded down Nyla's frame like liquid jewel, hugging her curves before flaring out in a subtle, dramatic train. Standing before the full-length mirror in the dressing room, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The exhaustion was gone, concealed by artful makeup and days of rest. Her hair was swept up, revealing the graceful slope of her neck, adorned only by a simple, devastatingly expensive diamond pendant Sung-hyuk had fastened there moments ago. She wasn't the shivering girl in the snow anymore. She looked like a weapon. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The car is ready. Sung-hyuk's voice came through the wood, deep and vibrating with that familiar, restrained power. Nyla opened the door. Sung-hyuk stood in the hallway, adjusting his cufflinks. He wore a tuxedo that fit him with lethal precision, the black fabric absorbing the light around him. When he looked up, his hands stilled. The air in the corridor seemed to vanish. He didn't smile. Sung-hyuk rarely smiled, but his gaze traveled over her with a slow, heavy intensity that felt like a physical touch. It was possessive. It was hungry. "You look." He stopped, clearing his throat, his jaw tightening as he fought to maintain his composure. "You look dangerous, Nyla." "Is that a compliment?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "In my world," he offered his arm, "it is the highest one." The ride to the Shilla Hotel was silent, but Sung-hyuk's hand rested over hers on the leather seat, his thumb tracing the back of her knuckles. It was a grounding weight. When the car doors opened, the flashbulbs blinded her. The press line was a chaotic wall of shouting and light, but Sung-hyuk didn't hurry. He stepped out first, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease, and then turned to offer her his hand. The moment her skin touched his, the chaos seemed to dull. He guided her past the cameras, shielding her body with his own, his expression a warning to anyone who dared to get too close. They reached the double doors of the ballroom. Inside, the elite of Seoul politicians, chaebol heirs, and rival syndicate leaders posing as businessmen mingled in a sea of champagne and false laughter. The doors swung open. The room didn't just go quiet. It froze. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the entrance. Nyla felt the weight of their stares. Confusion, curiosity, envy. She felt the urge to shrink, to revert to the invisible worker bee she had been for years. Sung-hyuk sensed it. His hand slid from her elbow to the small of her back, a warm, firm brand of ownership. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, intimate and shocking in such a public space. "Head up," he whispered, his voice a low rumble against the silence. "You are not beneath them. You are with me." Nyla inhaled sharply. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin. As they descended the grand staircase, the crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. They weren't looking at her with pity anymore. They were looking at her with fear, because the Dragon of Seoul had finally chosen a queen, and he was daring the world to challenge her. The air in the ballroom didn't shift. It curdled. One moment, Nyla was sipping champagne, the crystal flute cool against her fingertips, and the next, the ambient noise of the gala seemed to drop into a breathless void. Sung-hyuk felt it first. His hand, resting lightly on the small of her back, suddenly went rigid. His fingers curled into the silk of her gown, not painful, but possessed of a tension that wasn't there a second ago. "Don't look," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear. "Just stay close to me." But Nyla looked. She couldn't help it. Threading through the crowd was a man who moved with the swagger of someone who enjoyed the chaos. He wore a tuxedo that was too loud, a velvet maroon that clashed with the sea of black, and a scar that ran from his jaw to his ear. A jagged souvenir of a violence that polite society tried to ignore. Jang-soo stopped directly in their path, blocking their exit. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze wasn't on Sung-hyuk. It was entirely predatorily on Nyla. "So, the rumors are true," Jang-soo drawled, swirling his drink. "The dragon has come down from his mountain, and he brought a pearl with him." Nyla felt Sung-hyuk's body turn into stone against her side. He didn't step forward. He stepped in, angling his broad shoulders to create a physical barrier between her and the man grinning like a wolf. "Walk away, Jang-soo," Sung-hyuk said. His tone was conversational, bored even, but Nyla heard the undercurrent of lethal promise beneath it. "You are not welcome in my breathing space." "I was just admiring the view," Jang-soo replied, his eyes flicking over Nyla's dress with a lingering, oily insolence. "It is rare to see you with something so fragile. You know how clumsy people can be in crowds like this. Accidents happen. Beautiful things break so easily." Sung-hyuk's grip on Nyla's waist tightened until she gasped softly. The sound seemed to snap something inside him. He leaned in, closing the distance until he was looming over the smaller man. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. "If a single hair on her head is disturbed," Sung-hyuk whispered, loud enough only for the three of them to hear, "I will not just break you. I will dismantle everything you have ever touched, brick by brick, until even your name is forgotten." Jang-soo's smile faltered. For a split second, Genuine fear flickered in his eyes. He took a half-step back, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Enjoy the night, dragon," he sneered, retreating into the crowd. "While it lasts." As he disappeared, Sung-hyuk didn't relax. He stared at the spot where his rival had stood. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. Nyla looked up at him, trembling, and saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. He had brought her into the light to claim her, and in doing so, he had shown the wolves exactly where to bite. The drive back to the penthouse was suffocating. Sung-hyuk didn't hold her hand. He didn't look at her. He sat staring out the window, his profile carved from granite, radiating a coldness that made the interior of the luxury sedan feel like a tomb. When they entered the apartment, Nyla expected him to explain, to reassure her that the man at the gala was nothing to fear. Instead, Sung-hyuk walked straight to the liquor cabinet, poured a drink he didn't touch, and turned to face her with the eyes of a stranger. "Pack your things," he said. The voice wasn't the low rumble that had whispered compliments in her ear an hour ago. It was the voice of the dragon. Nyla froze, her clutch slipping from her fingers onto the marble floor. "What?" "My driver will take you to Incheon. There is a flight to Tokyo in 3 hours, then a connection to the States." He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a thick white envelope on the counter. "This is enough to start over. A new apartment, a new life, anywhere but here." Nyla looked at the envelope, then at him. The room spun. The warmth, the intimacy, the way he had looked at her like she was the only person in the room. It all evaporated, leaving her standing in the wreckage of her own hope. "You're sending me away?" Her voice shook. "Because of him? Because of Jang-soo? Because you are a liability," Sung-hyuk said. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth, but he forced it out. He had to make her hate him. If she hated him, she would leave. If she left, she would live. Tonight proved that. "I cannot fight a war while I am worried about babysitting a civilian." "Babysitting?" Nyla stepped forward, hurt flashing in her eyes like a physical wound. I thought this meant something. You told me I wasn't nothing. You were a debt I paid." He cut her off, his eyes hard and unyielding. "I saved you from the snow. I destroyed your boss. The debt is settled. Now you are in the way." He turned his back on her, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles turned white. He couldn't look at her. If he looked at the devastation on her face, he would break. He would fall to his knees and beg her to stay, and that would be her death sentence. "Go, Nyla," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "Before I have security remove you." Nyla stood there for a long, agonizing moment. The silence stretched between them, vast and unbridgeable. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, a slow, jerky movement, and picked up the envelope. It felt heavy in her hand, the weight of her dismissal. "I understand," she whispered. "I'm just disposable. Everywhere I go." She turned and walked toward the guest room, the sound of her heels clicking on the marble echoing like the final nails in a coffin. Sung-hyuk closed his eyes and listened to her walk away, his heart shattering in the silence. The elevator ride down to the private garage was a descent into hell. Nyla clutched the envelope to her chest, the paper crinkling in the suffocating silence, while Sung-hyuk stood apart. His reflection in the brushed steel doors was cold and unyielding, a statue of the man who had held her only hours before. He was escorting her to the car himself, a final, cruel courtesy. The doors slid open. The garage was vast and shadowed, the air smelling of concrete and gasoline. Sung-hyuk's driver held the rear door of the armored sedan open, his expression grim. "Go," Sung-hyuk said, his voice rough. "Don't look back." Nyla stepped forward, tears finally blurring her vision. She reached for the doorframe, her heart breaking with every inch of distance she put between them. Then the shadows moved. A screech of tires shattered the quiet. High beams blinded them as a black van drifted around the concrete pillar, sliding sideways. The side door flew open, revealing men in masks. Sung-hyuk didn't freeze. He didn't think. He moved faster than Nyla could process. "Get down!" The shout was swallowed by the crack of automatic gunfire. Bullets sparked against the concrete floor and pinged off the armored chassis of the sedan like angry hail. Sung-hyuk didn't dive for cover behind the car. He dove for her. He slammed into Nyla, wrapping his body around hers and driving them both into the back seat of the sedan. The impact knocked the wind out of her. He covered her completely, his broad back a human shield against the chaos outside. "Drive!" Sung-hyuk roared. The driver slammed the door and floored the accelerator. The sedan lurched forward, tires smoking as it peeled out of the garage. Glass shattered somewhere, not the bulletproof windows, but the side mirror disintegrating under fire. The car swerved violently onto the street, the engine screaming as they wove through the late-night traffic of Seoul. Behind them, the van pursued, reckless and aggressive, ramming the bumper of the sedan. Nyla was pressed into the leather, Sung-hyuk's heavy weight pinning her down. She could feel his heart hammering against her spine. Not the slow, steady rhythm of the dragon, but the frantic, terrifying beat of a man afraid. "Stay down," he gritted out, shifting his weight to check the rear window. He winced, a sharp intake of breath that he tried to suppress. Nyla scrambled to sit up as the car stabilized on the highway. "Sung-hyuk." He looked at her, his eyes wild, scanning her face for injuries. "Are you hit? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine," she gasped. Then she looked at his arm. The pristine white of his dress shirt was ruined. A dark, blossoming stain of crimson was spreading rapidly near his shoulder, where a bullet had grazed him before the door closed. "You're bleeding," she whispered, the horror of it choking her. "It's nothing," Sung-hyuk snapped, though his face had paled. He grabbed her hand, his grip bruising, proving that the cold distance from the elevator was gone. "Minho, lose them. Get us to the safe house. Now." He pulled Nyla back into his chest, burying his face in her hair, shielding her from the view of the chase. "I've got you," he breathed, the mask completely gone. "I've got you." The safe house was a fortress of glass and stone hidden deep in the mountains of Gyeonggi-do. Silence wrapped around them the moment the heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing out the wind and the phantom echoes of gunfire. Sung-hyuk sat on the edge of the low-slung sofa, his breathing ragged. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the stark reality of the blood soaking through his ruined dress shirt. "Sit still," Nyla commanded, her voice trembling but firm. She returned from the bathroom with a first aid kit, a grim echo of the night he had tended to her frostbitten fingers. Now the roles were reversed. She knelt between his legs, scissors in hand, and cut away the fabric of his shirt. The wound was a jagged graze across his deltoid. Ugly, angry, and bleeding sluggishly, but not lethal. Nyla let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "It is just a scratch," Sung-hyuk grunted, though his jaw tightened as she pressed a sterile pad to the skin. "You jumped in front of a bullet," Nyla whispered, her eyes burning. She didn't look up, focusing entirely on cleaning the blood from his skin. "You called me a liability. You told me to leave. And then you took a bullet for me." "Nyla, why?" She pressed harder than necessary, her hands shaking. "If I'm just a debt you paid, why did you cover me? Why are you bleeding?" Sung-hyuk caught her wrist. His grip was sudden, desperate. He pulled her hand away from the wound, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were wild, stripped of all their usual icy control. The dragon was gone. Only a terrified man remained. "Because I couldn't breathe," he rasped. "When I saw them, when I thought they might touch you, I stopped breathing." "Sung-hyuk, I lied," he confessed, the words tearing out of him. He pulled her closer until her chest bumped against his uninjured shoulder. "I called you a liability because you are one. You are the only thing in this world that can destroy me. If they hurt you, Nyla, I would burn this entire country to ash." He rested his forehead against hers, his resistance shattering completely. "I didn't send you away because I didn't want you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I sent you away because I love you too much to watch you die in my world." Nyla stilled. The confession hung in the air, heavy and absolute. She looked at the blood on his skin, then at the raw devotion in his eyes, and realized that the safest place in the world wasn't a fortress or a flight to Tokyo. It was right here in the line of fire beside him. Nyla stirred when the heavy steel door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent villa. She sat up, her heart pounding, reaching for the space beside her on the bed. It was cold. Sung-hyuk was gone. He hadn't taken a security detail. He hadn't called for backup. He drove the battered sedan back toward the city alone, the pain in his shoulder a dull, throbbing reminder of why he was doing this. He had tried to be a man worthy of Nyla, a man of business, of legitimate power, but Jang-soo had forced his hand. To save the woman who represented his future, Sung-hyuk had to embrace the monster of his past one last time. He arrived at the warehouse district in Incheon, the heart of Jang-soo's territory, just as the rain began to turn to sleet. The guards at the perimeter didn't even have time to radio for help. Sung-hyuk moved through the shadows with the terrifying efficiency of a ghost, silencing them before they hit the ground. He didn't feel the cold. He didn't feel the fatigue. He only felt the burning rage that had ignited the moment a bullet shattered the window next to Nyla's head. He kicked open the main doors of the warehouse. Inside, Jang-soo was laughing, holding court with a dozen armed men, celebrating the assassination of the dragon. The laughter died instantly. Sung-hyuk stood in the entrance, breathless but upright, his coat soaked, a gun in each hand. "Jang-soo," Sung-hyuk said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, vibrating growl that carried across the concrete floor. "I told you not to touch her. You're dead?" Jang-soo stammered, scrambling back as his men raised their weapons. "Kill him. He's just one man." Sung-hyuk didn't wait. He unleashed hell. The firefight was brutal and short. Sung-hyuk moved with a lethal grace, using the pillars for cover, his aim precise. He wasn't fighting for territory or money anymore. He was fighting for the right to return to the woman waiting in the mountains. Every shot was a promise kept. One by one, Jang-soo's men fell, until only the rival boss remained, cowering behind a stack of crates, his weapon empty. Sung-hyuk walked toward him, the sound of his footsteps heavy and inevitable. He tossed his empty guns aside. This needed to be personal. "Please," Jang-soo begged, holding up his hands. "It was business. Just business." "She isn't business," Sung-hyuk snarled, grabbing Jang-soo by the lapels and slamming him against the wall. "She is my life." He didn't give Jang-soo the dignity of a speech. He ended it quickly, with the ruthless efficiency that had earned him his title. Silence reclaimed the warehouse. Sung-hyuk stood amidst the wreckage of his enemy's empire, his chest heaving, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers stained with blood and oil, and dialed a number. "It is done," he said to the empty air. "Burn it down. I'm going home." The rain had turned to a deluge, hammering against the glass walls of the villa like 1,000 frantic fingers. Nyla sat by the door, her knees drawn to her chest, listening to the silence that felt louder than the storm. Every minute that ticked by was a physical ache. Then the heavy steel lock clicked. Nyla scrambled to her feet just as the door swung open. Sung-hyuk stood in the threshold. He was a ruin of the man who had left her hours ago. His tailored suit was torn and sodden. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his hands. His hands were stained with a dark, rusted red that the rain hadn't washed away. He looked like a monster who had crawled out of the abyss. But when he saw her, the cold, lethal edge in his eyes receded, leaving only a bone-deep exhaustion. "Sung-hyuk," Nyla breathed, stepping forward, her hands hovering, afraid to touch him and find he was broken. "It's done," he rasped. His voice was raw, as if he had screamed the words out of his soul. "Jang-soo is gone. They are all gone." He walked into the room, leaving wet footprints on the floor, and collapsed onto the edge of the leather sofa. He didn't check his wounds. He didn't ask for a drink. He just stared at his hands, watching a droplet of water and blood fall to the carpet. Nyla rushed to him, grabbing a towel to wipe the rain from his face. "You're hurt. We need to." "I'm fine," he said quietly. He caught her wrist, stopping her frantic ministrations. His grip was weak, trembling. Nyla, stop. Look at me. She froze, locking eyes with him. The darkness she had seen in him before was there, but it was receding, replaced by a terrifying clarity. I ended it, he said, but it will happen again. If I stay on the throne, there will always be another Jiangsu, another rival, another bullet meant for me that finds you instead. He pulled her hand to his chest, pressing it over his heart. It beat slowly, heavily against her palm, a drum of war finally winding down. I cannot be the dragon and your protector, he whispered. I cannot have the empire and you. The crown requires blood, and I am done paying with yours. What are you saying? Nyla asked, her throat tight. I am dismantling it, Sung-hyuk vowed. The syndicate, the territory, the power. I am walking away. He leaned his forehead against her stomach, closing his eyes and surrendering the weight of his legacy. I would rather be a nobody with you, he murmured into the fabric of her dress, than a king alone in the dark. The first snow of the season didn't arrive with a blizzard's fury, but with a quiet, graceful silence that coated Seoul in white. It was November, 8 months since the night the dragon had burned down his own kingdom to save the woman he loved. Nyla stood outside the newly inaugurated headquarters of Choi Enterprises. The building was glass and steel, transparent and legitimate, a stark contrast to the shadowed fortresses Sung-hyuk used to inhabit. She wasn't wearing a threadbare coat or trembling from exhaustion. She was wrapped in soft camel wool, her posture relaxed, her eyes bright as she watched the snowflakes drift down against the gray sky. The glass doors opened. Sung-hyuk stepped out. He was alone. There were no bodyguards flanking him, no armored SUV idling at the curb with the engine running. He wore a navy suit, impeccably tailored, but the tension that used to coil in his shoulders was gone. The darkness that had once clung to him like a second skin had lifted, replaced by the quiet, formidable authority of a man who no longer had to look over his shoulder. He saw her immediately. He didn't stop to check the perimeter. He didn't scan the rooftops for snipers. He simply walked toward her, his strides long and steady, his focus absolute. To the rest of the world, he was the elusive CEO of a rising logistics empire. To Nyla, he was simply the man who had chosen her over the world. You waited, he said, stopping inches from her. His breath plumed in the cold air, mixing with hers. I finished early, Nyla smiled, reaching out to straighten his lapel. A gesture of intimacy she never would have dared a year ago. And I wanted to see the snow. Sung-hyuk looked up at the falling flakes, then back down at her. His expression softened, the sharp angles of his face smoothing into something reverent. The last time it snowed like this, he started, his voice low. I was on my knees, Nyla finished for him. She didn't look away. And I was alone. Sung-hyuk took her hand. His palm was warm, his grip firm and grounding. He interlaced their fingers, squeezing tight, an anchor in the shifting city. Never again, he promised, the vow as heavy and unbreakable as the first time he had made it in the safety of the mountains. You stand now, Nyla, always beside me. They turned and began to walk down the street, their footsteps crunching softly in the fresh powder. Passers-by glanced at them, the towering, intense man and the radiant woman beside him, but they didn't see a tragedy or a scandal. They saw a king and queen of a new, quiet world, walking through the winter not as survivors, but as conquerors. Nyla squeezed his hand back, and for the first time in her life, she didn't just feel safe. She felt free. Strength, Nyla had always believed, was a wall. It was the ability to stand in the biting wind without shivering, to swallow insults without flinching, and to navigate a hostile world without asking for a map. For years, she had worn her independence like armor, convinced that needing help was a crack in the foundation, a sign that she wasn't enough. But as she sat by the fireplace in their new home, watching the flames cast dancing shadows across Sung-hyuk's features, she realized she had been wrong. You are thinking too loud, Sung-hyuk murmured, not looking up from the book in his lap. His hand rested on her knee, a constant, grounding weight. I was thinking about the snow, Nyla admitted softly. I used to think that letting you save me made me weak, that if I couldn't stand up on my own, I didn't deserve to stand at all. Sang-hyuk closed the book. He turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. The scar on his shoulder, hidden beneath his sweater, was a testament to the night he had proven her wrong. And now, he asked. Now I know that standing alone isn't strength, she said, covering his hand with hers. It's just survival. And I don't want to just survive anymore. Sang-hyuk turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. I spent my life believing that power was absolute control. That if I felt nothing, I could lose nothing. I built an empire on the premise that I was untouchable. He brought her knuckles to his lips, his touch reverent. But that wasn't power, Nyla. It was cowardice. It was a terrified boy hiding in a fortress of ice. He looked at her with a vulnerability that would have shattered the Dragon of Seoul. Letting you in, dismantling the walls I spent decades building. That was the hardest thing I have ever done. That was the only true strength I have ever shown. They sat in the quiet warmth, two people who had once defined themselves by their solitude. Nyla realized then that love wasn't about two broken halves trying to make a whole. It was about two whole, formidable forces choosing to lean on each other. Not because they would fall without the support, but because they stood taller together. We don't kneel anymore, Sang-hyuk whispered, echoing the promise he made in the snow. No, Nyla agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. We stand. And in that shared silence, they found the only definition of strength that mattered. The courage to be known, the bravery to be held, and the power of facing the world not as one, but as two.